Olá, eu sou o Roberto Sadowski, eu estou aqui no Artist Valley da CCXP Worlds e a gente vai bater um papo agora com o DeMatteis e o Jon J Muth sobre Moonshadow e outras coisas, outras cositas más. Vamos lá. So, hello, how are you guys?
Hola.
We're doing well, thank you.
I'm not sure if I call you guys John and John. So
Call me JM, that'll make it easy.
Okay, JM and John. And we just got this new edition of Moonshadow here in Brazil. It's like a big, thick book. And I was rereading it because I read it ages ago when it was released. And then I came to realize that ages ago was really ages ago. It was like 30-something years ago. So how do you guys recollect when you first started this project? I know JM, you had to present it to DC and then Marvel and then went back and forth. So how was the genesis of Moonshadow?
You know, it started, I had the idea years before we ever did it. And it was a much more conventional. I guess it was sort of, my original idea was sort of Jim Starlin meets Kurt Vonnegut, meets Jack Kirby, meets Candide, which I guess maybe isn't that conventional when I say it that
it's
way.
It's not conventional at all. I like John's face now.
My mental approach to it was like it was going to feel more like a traditional comic book. Do you know what I mean? And I carried that idea around with me for years. In fact, in the new edition that came out in the back, I found all my original handwritten notes from when I first had the idea. I found all kinds of great stuff. I don't usually save that stuff, but Moonshadow means so much to me that I saved just about everything. And eventually, I was working at Marvel, and it was I guess around 1983, and things were starting to really change in comics. The Epic line was happening, things like Pacific Comics, Camelot 3000 at DC. So there were new formats and new opportunities to tell different kinds of stories as opposed to just the usual stories with the usual superheroes. And I got very excited by that. So what you mentioned DC, because what happened at that time, I had been under contract to Marvel. I was thinking of going back to DC where I started my career. And so they offered me some stuff and I pitched them Moonshadow, which Karen Berger at the time was just starting her editing career. And she was very excited about it. She was going, I don't know if you even know this. So she was going to get Dave Gibbons, who was brand new to comics. And I was going to do Moonshadow for DC with Dave Gibbons. How's that?
Wow.
In some weird parallel universe, that's the version that exists. But I decided to stay at Marvel because I was having a good time there, as much as I loved my friends at DC, and pitched it to Jim Shooter, who said, well, this sounds like an epic comic to me, and he sent me over to the late, great, brilliant Archie Goodwin. And then I needed an artist, and through the good graces of my friend Dan Green, who knew John, he passed my proposal along, and the rest is history.
And John, I know that it was the first fully painted comic book in the American market. So how was the proposal to do the book with painted artwork instead of, pencil and inks?
Well, that's interesting because I actually, after we kind of decided we would do it together, I did about 2 or 3 pages that were done very traditionally. I just did line drawings. In fact, I kind of was trying to capture some of the Dickensian things that I was seeing that I really liked by Fizz, his Charles Dickens' illustrator. I thought a lot of what Mark was doing somehow felt like that. And so I proposed it visually to Archie Goodwin by saying, well, here's what I've got. And he said, well, these are great, except why aren't you painting it? Because everything he'd seen by me was painted. And I thought, well, that's just for the magazine that you were putting out, Epic Illustrated. I didn't think anybody was going to do a fully painted comic. But he said, yeah, let's do that. So I went back home and started over.
So how long did it take to paint the whole series?
Well, it took 2 years. We did it every other month. And even that was pushing it sometimes.
Wow.
And And they had enormous patience, but that's really what it took to make things work. I don't know how to explain that really.
And the market was really different back then. I know JM mentioned Camelot 3000. There was, I think the first big 12-issue non-superhero event. So how was it with not only with the fans, but also with the retailers to present something as alien as Moonshadow? Even in the Epic, under the Epic banner, it was still a Marvel comic. So how was the reaction of fans and of retailers when you guys presented the thing?
What I remember is that the reaction overall was incredibly positive, certainly more positive than anything else I'd ever written before. Because that was a series really for me as a writer where I really was able to find my voice. And working with Jon, there was just this artistic chemical combustion that created something I think that neither one of us could have done alone. And so the response that I remember certainly within the industry and with the reviews that I read was very, very positive. What I do remember is one retailer going ballistic. I don't know, was it a retailer or a big distributor, because it was an adult comic.
Distributor.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there was, there's a very tastefully done scene, as masturbation scenes go, in the first issue where Moonshadow talks about, because he's a teenager, going through puberty, so he talks about masturbation, not in any sort of graphic or trashy way, and this guy just went bananas, so that's why they started putting, I think, a fairy tale for grown-ups on the cover. I don't think that was on the first issue.
That's by way of a warning, I suppose.
Yes, grown-ups. They made sure the word grown-ups was there,
Because
but the
I think
response
the
that I
artwork
remember was very positive. Go ahead.
Right, I think it was positive too. I think there was Mark's writing was just immediately embraced. The whole idea of the story was embraced by the people that I spoke to about it. Some of the professionals, some of the artists were, I think, a little more confused by the pacing that I was using or the choices I was making from page to page. And it wasn't actually written like or rather drawn like a traditional panel-to-panel Jack Kirby comic. It was really more meditatively paced at places, and because it was painted,
really was meditatively paced. It really was. The story. The great thing about the story was,
except where it wasn't, except where we would do the explosive things,
right.
Or we would.
Right, but that was it. That was the fun. If we wanted to take, if I wanted to take 3 pages of Moonshadow, essentially stand around musing, we did that.
Yep.
And then if we wanted 3 pages of action and crazy, if we wanted. I was just writing, as if I were writing a novel, and so I think there was this back and forth, I hope, between us, where what I was doing in the scripts was inspiring him, he was inspiring me, and I don't think we realized, at least I didn't, that we were breaking boundaries, because just to what you were saying, Jon, was that I remember an artist saying to me, "But this isn't a comic book." But what's a comic book? It's words and pictures.
I get that a lot, actually.
Right. But that's what was so great about it. It exploded barriers in my own head. Whatever it did for other people, I don't know. But for me, it exploded my whole approach to what a comic book could be.
You guys think that today Moonshadow would be as easily produced? I mean, in the ways of, is the market too different today? Was it bolder back then? People were experimenting more back then? How do you guys compare 35 years later?
Well, I know what I think about the graphic novel industry. It's kind of booming in the United States. So there's an entire industry now of people doing graphic novels, and it's more common. It's one of the more predominant books you find in bookstores for kids. So it's a very different marketplace. As far as being experimental, being different, or being accepted, it would be produced more quickly.
Okay.
Because somebody would, just because it's easier to do things in full color. At the time, we were still wrestling with that. The paper stock, where it was going to be printed. But there are so many different kinds of books being done now. I find that we might be less likely to have hit a mark, or rather, it might be lost in the sea of things a little bit more. So the fact that it showed up when it did was kind of extraordinary.
Yeah.
Really.
Because back then we were doing, I think, something that, although we didn't realize it at the time, really hadn't been done before. And we were doing it within the context of a Marvel and DC world. You know,
Yes.
what John is saying is that that world has exploded and expanded so that, you know, there are so many publishers involved in graphic novels. But if we were doing this in regular mainstream comics today, for one thing, it would probably just be some creator-owned book that we would not be getting paid for. In those days, you could do a creator-owned book and actually get paid something reasonable and make a living and still have rights and all those things. Those days are gone. You know, you can do your creator-owned book now, and there's a lot of interesting stuff out there. But most of the people, with rare exceptions, doing creator-owned books are not making a living doing that. So that's a big difference. But I think the biggest difference is what he said, is that it's expanded beyond the Marvel and DC world out into a broader publishing world.
When you guys reprinted it under DC and Vertigo, so how was it getting the story and changing publishers? Because I'm not sure if that's a thing, if that happened before.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think so. So
I was talking to that's kind of down, if I may, Mark. I would give
Go ahead,
that.
sure.
I would have to do a shout out to our agent on the book, Alan Spiegel, who took the book after and kept our rights, and then took it to another publisher and said, "Hey, this is available." And it was remembered fondly by editors then at Vertigo. Karen finally got the chance to edit and be involved in it when it was taken over to Vertigo. And then after that lapsed, Dark Horse was the third large comics company. So I don't actually personally know of another book or another property having been published by all three major companies. I kind of think that's amazing.
Yeah.
So now after 35 years, and we see that the market is different and the public perception of comics is different. We see comic books being turned into TV series, streaming series, more movies. Sometimes properties that people, they don't even know it's a comic book originally. My friends who saw, I don't know, Umbrella Academy on Netflix, and I say, well, that's a comic book. And people go, it's what? It's a comic book?
Right.
It's a book for kids? And so have you ever thought now, were you ever approached by any other kind of medium to translate Moonshadow into another medium?
I've had discussions with folks over the years about it, because there are definitely Moonshadow fans out there. But, you know, back in the day, when I would have these discussions, it would be an impossible book to translate. It would be so hugely expensive, you know? Whereas now I think we finally reached the point where it could be translated. Although I have to say, in my imagination, what I would really love to see is an animated movie for adults done in Jon Muth's style, as if his work just came to life on the screen. That's what I think would be really ideal. But, you know, if anyone else has millions of dollars they want to throw our way, I'm open to discussions.
Why not?
Well, I think it's what you're saying, Roberto, is really interesting. For a long period in between kind of the explosion or implosion of comics and graphic novels by the three big comic companies, then the growing of it outside of comics and the comic form making its way into an adult. There was a long period of that's fully finished. They've got the visuals. They don't have, but yeah, I haven't heard many people. Mark, you've got a couple things going though with other properties, right?
Yeah, and I think Moonshadow's time will come. I really do. I am actively pursuing that. So, you know, and the other thing is, right now, kind of what you were saying. There's a whole audience out there that well, some of them know comics from the Marvel and DC movies, and others, like your friends, just are absorbing all this comic book material, whether they realize it or not. And the people sitting behind the desks at movie companies are people that know and understand comics. Whereas even 10 or 15 years ago when I was pitching stuff, you didn't run into that. It was a rare thing and an exciting thing when you ran into somebody who knew and understood comics. Whereas now, it's just sort of by cultural osmosis. It's in the culture now.
Right. I was just thinking this the other day. It's like all the comics that I would just completely immerse myself in the Avengers and stuff, the idea that those would be the biggest money-making films at this point in time is kind of a mind blower, because I just love that stuff, and not other than my friends, I didn't think anybody knew about it.
Jon, after Moonshadow, you did an adaptation of Dracula, which is a beautiful, beautiful book, and you also adapted M, the Fritz Lang movie, which is also a beautiful book. Mine are like stashed in my backpack right here. I was rereading everything. But apart from Wolverine, Havoc and Wolverine, you didn't do much superhero work for Marvel or DC. So what interests you in the art form of comic books? And why superheroes are not, it doesn't seem to be your thing?
I love superheroes. And I got the chance to work with Mark on Silver Surfer for a very brief time. That it wasn't the greatest time of my personal life, so I think it didn't go as nicely as it might have. But I still look back on doing those issues with him and fondly, and think that was a lot of fun. He was one of my favorite superheroes. But there aren't a lot of superheroes I think I would do well. So it usually happens that I've got some idea, like with Havoc, Wolverine, or in the case of Silver Surfer, where I think I could actually do something, and the language I'd be using would actually fit that story. And I just think for the most part, my way of doing stories is just less likely to be found in superhero stories. I love them. I love watching them, love reading them, many of them. So,
and JM, what I find it funny is that when the market was opening for darker superheroes, you got Justice League and you helped make it funny, and it was just fun. And it's being reprinted in Brazil right now, and I know that's a new generation that are discovering it. And on the other hand, you got one of the funniest superheroes that is Spider-Man, and you wrote some really dark and heavy stuff, Kraven's Last Hunt, and all your stories with Sal Buscema drawing. So how do you see superheroes, and how do you do these different ways of us to perceive it? The funny being darker and the darkest stuff being funnier.
It sounds like a cliche, but I just tend to follow the characters. When Keith Giffen and I were working with Kevin Maguire on Justice League, we didn't set out to do a funny book. The characters kind of led us to it. The tone sort of emerged in the process. I didn't sit down to do Kraven's Last Hunt and say, I'm going to do the darkest Spider-Man story ever told. It just kind of happened that way. And talk about a bad time in my personal life. That's why that story was so dark. But the funny thing was that I was working on both of those things simultaneously. And that's what I always look for. I don't really care that much about this is this genre, that genre, whatever it is. I do creator-owned stuff. I do superhero stuff. I've done autobiographical comics. I just love a good story, and you want to follow the characters, and whatever the tone of the story that the characters lead you into, that's where you go. I love the variety. If all I ever did was just straight-ahead superhero comics, I would have jumped out a window years ago. But the wonderful thing that comics has done for me is open the door and allowed me to tell many different kinds of stories. And that's what keeps me going, and that's why I'm still busy and active now, all these years later.
And you did write some DC animated movies, which are...
a bunch of them, yeah.
And they're absolutely brilliant. I think the stories, they talk to me way better than some big budget movies. And as a comic book fan, it's frustrating sometimes when you see an adaptation of, Batman or Superman or Justice League or whatever, and we don't feel that passion of the writing team. So was there any conversations of you as a writer just to jump into the big screen and say, guys, I write these characters and I wrote some movies for you, so why don't I write the live action movies as well?
Right. Well, the big question for me is forget me for a second. If you look at what the guys at Warner Brothers Animation have done with the DC characters since Batman the Animated Series, some of the best interpretations of those characters ever. Why they are not knocking down the door of Bruce Timm or James Tucker or those guys and saying, please write our live action movies, I have no clue. But I think that especially the DC animated stuff has been some of the best interpretations of these characters ever done. Forgetting my own contributions, just in general, what Bruce Timm and James Tucker and all those guys have done over the years.
Yeah, they have heart, they get the core of the characters, and I see the characters that I know and love, and sometimes when I see some movies, they're just not there. So I don't get it. I always say we read the comics and we know the stories, and these writers, these artists, they're all there. So give them a call. Get the phones and get it going.
I hope they're watching. And listening.
Same here. Jon, after doing Dracula and M, that I think are works of art, and I think they're really close to your heart for you to adapt them, was there any other story that you ever thought, I want to do that as a comic as well?
Well, there was a book I just came out, actually. There was one kind of outstanding called The Seventh Voyage by Stanislav Lem.
Cool.
And that was the most recent... hang on. There we go. I just happened to have...
Oh, my God. I can't reach it. Sorry. It's beyond my grasp. I can't.
Nominated for an Eisner Award.
Wow.
Yes, didn't get it, but it was lovely to be remembered, because I was afraid that nobody would remember me in comics because it's been so long. But that came out just within the last year. So that was waiting to be done. I'd started that about 20 years ago, actually, and then set it aside while I started concentrating on children's books. And my publisher, Scholastic, has a graphic novel division, and they decided that might be a good story. So I just finished that up. I have a couple of other things which are kind of hybrid-like, maybe the way Dracula included scripts, play scripts and prose that might end up being done. But I don't have anything specifically like in the mainstream for DC or Marvel in mind right now. But if never say never. I just keep my door open.
I'll just patiently wait for that to be released in Brazil. That looks just
I hope
wonderful.
It will be. It should be. I'll tell them you're looking for it.
Please do. And after so many years, and you guys are always fondly remembered as a great team working in Moonshadow. Are there any plans for you guys to do something together again?
Not at the moment. We've done stuff over the years. We did that Silver Surfer together. You worked on Seekers into the Mystery with me. And I feel like there was something else along the way that we might have done. And, if the opportunity arose at any point, I would jump at it. I would be delighted to work with him.
We've been connected and staying in touch. If something shows up, I would love to work with Mark, with the right thing, with the right property and the right...
Absolutely.
But, he's one of my favorite writers, so that's an easy one.
So how was the work during this very weird year that we've been having?
You go first, Mark.
I think it's the same answer for everybody. It's weird. It's really, the only upside for me, I don't know if upside is the right word, is that I'm a writer. I work at home. I'm a homebody. I have been my whole life. So creatively, though, one of the things that because things slowed down for me a little bit once COVID started, and then I just decided, okay, if things are slowing down, then this is the time to start creating a lot of new projects. So I'm working with some wonderful artists on like 4 different new projects, and very excited about all of them. And I think you're going to see a lot of that next year. I think there's a lot of creators right now that, because of the lockdown, they're digging out those passion projects and they're working on them. And I hope that when next year rolls around, as things begin to lighten up, we're going to see a lot of great new work from a lot of different people.
Right. Isn't that kind of a historic thing that people do? That like during the Depression, weren't the movies did well, but entertainment did well. The things that distracted us from the kind of stuff that was going on, right? It's always done okay during the difficult times. For me, Roberto, it's like I feel like the shutting down and the quarantining with my family has made everything feel very like everything's kind of slowed down. And I've tried to bring my attention, instead of looking outward so much, but bring my attention to what's right in front of me. My wife and I spent a lot of time working on building a wall in the back of our garden. And with the kids, I'm lucky enough to be able to go and take them on walks. We're relatively isolated, so we can take them on long walks. And during that time, my kids, who are 13, were becoming re-enchanted by nature in a very intimate way. It's different than, say, when you can watch television and you can see the top of the Andes, or you can go to Africa or the rainforest, and I think sometimes that overwhelms us so much that being reoriented toward what you actually experience day to day is, I think it's really, it's good to come back to where you actually are. And in some ways, the pandemic is responsible for doing that. I mean, it made everything kind of slow down to the speed of life, in a sense.
Yeah.
And that's been really helpful.
Just the point that you made about kind of bringing the focus back in is really important, because especially in a time like this, you cannot be plugged into the news all the time, or your head will explode and you will die. You have to turn that off and find the things inside you and within your family that ground you and nurture you and show you that life is not this crazy cesspool that the media is trying to tell us it is, that it's something of value, which I believe it is.
Yeah.
You know, whether you do that through meditation or just being with your family or through art or whatever it is, it's just a good time to really focus on those things that nurture the soul and reinforce the idea that yes, our lives have meaning and value, and it's not just the insanity that CNN is trying to tell us about 24 hours a day.
Right. That's exactly what I meant. I started trying to figure out how I could do something which would remind people of that. And so I did a bunch of filming of just stuff in the backyard, and I found snakes, and I found frogs, and I found beautiful leaves just drifting through puddles, and I realized this is as beautiful and I don't know, life affirming as, you know, whatever it is that I'm seeing when I, you know, watch television or anything like that. It's actually more connected in a sense. So I was trying to figure out, what am I going to do to make that, to remind people of that? And I'm still working on that a bit. I wrote some music, and I may release something on the internet, kind of about that, because I don't really have a big presence on the internet. But I thought, well, maybe this would be something I should actually do. I should probably say, this is what I think we're missing in some way. You know, not to beat anybody over the head with it, but to do it gently and to just make a suggestion.
And I think that historically, after world-changing events, even from the Black Plague or the Depression, art would be like the refuge of people to reconnect after all this craziness, right?
It has been for me.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
And Mark, just to wrap things up, I have a very important question to ask you. Do you still have Grateful Dead fans wanting your head on a plate or something?
What?
I don't, but now that you brought it up, they're going to come after me again. So the story is, years ago, we have to put this in context. Years ago, before I was working in comics, I was a musician. I also was a music journalist, and I did some work for Rolling Stone, and I did a review of a Grateful Dead album, and I was not kind to it. And I got a big stack of mail that Rolling Stone sent to me from these Grateful Dead fans, because they're like comic book fans. They're very, very passionate. And it wasn't so much that they were angry as they were profoundly wounded by what I said, as if I had said terrible things about their mother. And that, in fact, was the thing that convinced me that I didn't want to write reviews. I said I would rather be the guy creating the art and being torn apart by critics than somebody sitting there judging other people's work. I would rather be creating work. So no, I haven't heard from any Grateful Dead fans in a long time, but now that you brought it up, I'm sure I will.
I'm so sorry.
I've never heard that. That's great. No, that's great.
So I want to thank you guys for your time and for the talk. I think in times like this, especially in times like these, talking about things we love, makes the heart feel lighter. So thank you guys so much. It was really cool. I got to reread Moonshadow now, and I'm still waiting for that Marvel omnibus on yours and Sal Buscema's Spider-Man run. That was absolutely.
Yeah, I'm waiting too.
I mean,
hopefully everybody's watching and the word will get out.
Yeah, that was just brilliant and made me cry when I was a teenager, and it was really powerful.
Thank you.
Good stuff.
Yeah,
right?
it was good.
Yeah. Thank you, Roberto.
I guess that's it. Thank you so much, guys. This was a real pleasure for all of us. And I'll keep following you on Twitter, Mark. Sometimes we exchange some things on Twitter. I don't think you remember, but we actually talked.
But now I will know. Just bring up the Grateful Dead so I know that it's you.
I will. I'll send you something later on.
Okay.
Okay. So thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Então a gente encerrou aqui mais um bate-papo no Artist Valley do CCXP Worlds com o DeMatteis e o Jon J Muth sobre Moonshadow e várias outras coisas. E espero que vocês continuem aqui com a gente acompanhando esse material bacana. Eu sou o Roberto Sadowski ainda e até a próxima.